Hello and welcome! This tutorial is a continuation of the previous video. In this video, I'll show you how the limit and offset clauses work and how to implement pagination. You can use Google Sandbox for this tutorial. If you encounter any issues, leave a comment and I'll do my best to help. I'll be using a table called flowers, which looks like this. You can use any other table you prefer. The limit clause in BigQuery is used to restrict the number of rows returned by a query. It is evaluated last in the query execution order, meaning it has the lowest priority. This means that all other clauses like from, where, group by, order by, etc. are processed before the limit clause is applied. The execution order of clauses in a BigQuery query is as follows: from, where, group by, and aggregation functions, having window functions, qualify, distinct, order by, and limit. Therefore, the limit clause operates on the result set produced by all preceding clauses. It simply takes the first n rows from the result, where n is the number specified in the limit clause. Click the plus button to open a new query editor and start writing your SQL code. The value specified after the limit clause must be a non-negative integer, specifically an int64 in BigQuery. Here are some examples demonstrating valid and invalid usage. Valid, integer. This query returns a maximum of 10 rows. Invalid, float. Using a floating point number is not allowed. Invalid, null. Null is not a valid value for the limit clause. Invalid, string. Using a string is not permitted. The value must be an integer. Invalid, negative number. Negative numbers are not allowed. Invalid, expressions. You cannot use expressions within the limit clause. Invalid, subqueries. Subqueries are not allowed in the limit clause. As mentioned, using integer values is the correct way to use limit. Using limit 0 is valid. It returns an empty result set, no rows. Using limit 0 can be useful for testing query syntax or retrieving only the schema, metadata, of a table without processing any data, thus avoiding unnecessary processing and costs. If you use the set operators, union all, union distinct, union, intersect distinct, except distinct, except the limit will be applied at the end. For example, the following query will first union both queries, then it will apply the count. So, if I run this query, the count is going to be 312. But if I add limit 1 to the second query, it will not limit just the second query to 1. It will compute the union and then limit the result to 1, resulting in a count of 1. It's similar to putting everything in parentheses. So, if I want to apply the limit only to the second query, then I need to add parentheses to change the order of operations. So, if I run just the first query, it will return 156. The other query, limited to 1, returned 1 row, so the end result is 157. While limit dictates how many rows you see in the output, it doesn't affect the underlying work the database performs. The database still processes all the data required by the query before applying the limit. So, even if you only retrieve a few rows with limit, the database might have processed a much larger dataset. It's crucial to always monitor the amount of data processed by your queries to optimize performance and control costs. Offset tells BigQuery to skip a certain number of rows before it starts giving you results. For example, this query is identical with this query is saying, hey, display 2 rows per page and start from page 0. We all know in programming counting starts from 0, so 0, it is the first page. So if I add offset 1, then I go to the next page and I skip the first 2 rows and get the next 2. In BigQuery, just like with limit, offset cannot be negative, a floating point number, or an expression. If you set an offset larger than the number of rows in your table, BigQuery will return an empty result set. It's as if you're asking it to skip past all the data. There's no error message. It simply returns no rows. So, be mindful of your offset values to avoid unintentionally getting no results. I hope this clarifies how offset works in BigQuery. If you have any questions or anything you didn't quite understand, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more BigQuery tips and tutorials.